I don't know if you've been paying much attention to Techland as of late, or if you're even aware of this, but for those of you that didn't know, Techland has another game in development. For those of you who don't know who Techland is, they're basically the development team behind the Dying Light games. They originally announced this unannounced game back in May of last year, and just recently they showed a little bit of concept art as to what this game is about, as well as a little bit of information behind it. And when I say a little bit, I mean very little, basically 2 sentences. All we know about this game is that it's going to be a fantasy RPG that is story focused. And then they mentioned that it's going to be combining and refining the best aspects of gameplay that Techland is known for, which I take that last part as meaning first person melee based combat. Well, it's open to discussion on how good or how bad Dying Light 2's combat is in comparison to the original, because those 2 games are pretty divisive. Looking at least those 2 games, Techland has been known for precisely that, first person melee focused combat. So I'm assuming this fantasy RPG base game is going to be very much similar to those games in at least the combat aspect, and we do know it's going to be an exotic open world. My only concern is that they've really learned from the last 2 games. Actually, let's take a look at Techland's entire game catalog. I can't speak for the Call of Juarez games because I've never played any of those. I have played Dead Island 1, Riptide, and both Dying Light games, and I can say, while Techland has become much more ambitious in their storytelling, it hasn't gotten that much better. They have definitely taken much more chances and expanded on it, with Dying Light 2 giving you the options to actually pick and choose what your outcome is, who you're siding with, the ending of your story, and so on. Ultimately, in the end, it felt like the majority of us didn't really feel like any of that was really necessary. And while the story of Dying Light 2 is much more stronger than Dying Light 1, it's still nowhere near strong enough to be the primary lure for people to want to buy a Techland game. It's all basically for the combat, whether if you want to argue against it or not. So I think if they really want this RPG-driven story to be this good, they're going to have to bring in some serious talent, as well as take in all the criticism they heard from the story and really build upon all of this criticism. And as much as it sucks, I would also say, just looking at Dying Light 2 and how they decided to take a little bit of an RPG route with this game, it was basically a blueprint for what this fantasy game that they're working on could be next. And Dying Light 2's launch, there really wasn't that much that made it feel like an RPG. Sure, you had crafting material, levels, enemy levels, and stuff like that. I don't really know how to explain it other than it just felt disconnected. It had the elements of an RPG game, at least on the surface, but it didn't feel or give that experience of an RPG type of game. And I've said it in previous videos, Timon Smektala, the lead game designer at Techland, has been doing a great job at taking in feedback from the community and fans, and I hope that stuff also helps kind of guide what the next title is going to be, or how it's going to perform and how it's going to look like, because it seems like with Dying Light 2, at times anyways, it was almost as if Techland themselves didn't know what direction they wanted to take with their own game, so they relied on the fans, their community, to kind of guide that. And that's not entirely a bad thing, it just shows that you don't have confidence in your own product at times. Like I've said 1,000 times before, you gotta be able to hit that compromise to make it look like you're working with your community, not working for your community. You know what I mean? Looking at this early screenshot and taking in that last comment of bringing in gameplay elements that Techland has developed, refined, and has been known for, yeah, I'm not the only one making this speculation. Everyone's thinking it. You have a guy here climbing on a tree. It would make sense for them to bring back the parkour system. And with the Dying Light series, we don't see that much trees, stuff we can climb in nature. It's all buildings and urban environments. So it would be nice to have that type of mix-up, to be able to go from climbing on vines, running around on treetops, and then hitting, these types of ruins that we see in the distance. It would be a nice mix-up to see lush foliage and then go into some ruins and destroyed buildings, and this could be just a small portion of the world. See what this looks like to me, just at a first glance. I could be entirely wrong here. Like, I know it's a fantasy RPG, so we're probably dealing with the future and it's a little bit post-apocalyptic, who really knows, but the trees, the background, the buildings themselves, it reminds me of like Aztec architecture, or even Mayan architecture. It actually reminds me a little bit of the movie Apocalypto. If you ever seen that movie, not too many people have, but that movie's all about the Mayans and smaller tribes being raided by them and blood sacrifices and whatnot, but I digress. I'm looking at this screenshot, possibility of parkour returning. I'm looking at this screenshot with a closer image of the architecture and the open landscape. It would be interesting to see exactly how this pans out, but if it's going to be story driven, Techland really has to take that step back and acknowledge and expand upon everything they've done with Dying Light 2. For me personally, the way I'm looking at it, they are nowhere near capable of delivering a compelling, narrative-driven story on top of the fact that it's going to be RPG, which would mean you're probably going to have multiple choices, which will then impact the story. Something that was supposed to happen with Dying Light 2, but obviously wasn't as impactful or massive as it initially sounded like it was going to be. But of course, like always, that's just my 2 cents about the topic. I just thought that was funny that we're not too much funny. It's interesting that they're trying to tackle on what they've probably been having considered to be the most weakest aspect of their games recently, which is the narrative. So for them to be all center focused around that, if they can deliver on it and make it something unique, engaging, and actually good, then this new IP would be an impressive one for them to have under their belt. It's just funny that it's RPG and it's completely, in their own words, different from anything they've ever delivered. So I don't even know if the parkour system would come back, because it's so ingrained in Dying Light's DNA. If you want something to be completely different, I don't think they should bring that back. But I could be entirely wrong. Let me know what you think down in the comments section. How do you feel about this RPG? When do you think we would ever actually hear anything concrete about it besides initial concept art about it? Let's talk down below. But like always, guys, my name is Cynic. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you all later.